This will start our positional off-season series. We haven't really done this before specifically, but without the combine this year, we have a little bit of extra time, so I thought it makes sense. So, folks, what we're going to do here, we're going to go position by position over the next 3 weeks, talk about the Giants' situation at that position, the top free agents at that position, and then without getting too much detail into specific prospects, talk about the general depth at that position in the draft, just to kind of figure out where the Giants stand at all these spots. So it makes sense, guys. The first thing we're going to talk about here is the quarterback position. The Giants, they've made it abundantly clear Daniel Jones is their starter for next season. So at this point, we're talking about who else is going to be on the roster at quarterback. Colt McCoy, a free agent, so the Giants could bring him back or be in the market for a new backup quarterback. And then there's a question of whether or not they're going to add a developmental quarterback somewhere down the road. So I could see them doing both, to be quite honest with you. Your guys' thoughts, and Paul, will start with you in terms of where the Giants are headed with their backup quarterback spot and perhaps even adding a developmental guy for down the road.
Well, John, we've all discussed how the salary cap is going to be shrinking. We don't know exactly how much. So, to be honest, I know the Giants have enough of other issues to take care of with their money. I don't expect them to overspend on a backup QB. Now, we all, I believe, understand the importance of the backup quarterback. You can't have somebody who just is a placeholder and just there to take up a roster spot. He's got to have some value and some function, and you basically need to be able to say to yourself, if he plays a couple of games or even if he has to play a month, can we be competitive with that guy in the game if need be? I kind of think that Colt McCoy is that guy. He's on the other side of 30. Last year he made the veteran minimum. Then the Giants, on top of that, threw in a $1 million signing bonus or so. I would expect that he would get another one-year contract at the veteran minimum. We know what kind of teammate he is. We know how smart he is. We know he gets along with Daniel Jones and is not going to pressure him in terms of trying to take his job or anything like that. And he's a game manager, and he's smart. There's a lot of reasons why Colt McCoy is probably the best fit for the Giants. And then when you take into account the other free agent quarterbacks that will be available, if you're looking at career backups, if you want someone of McCoy's ilk to come in, what are you looking at? Matt Schaub, Matt Barkley, Nate Sudfeld, Joe Flacco. I mean, these are the kinds of guys that you're talking about. So, I don't know, is McCoy really any worse than those guys? Are those guys, or should I say, are they an upgrade from him? I don't think so. So I would bring McCoy back on a one-year veteran minimum.
Lance, we could talk about some of the guys in the top of the free agent market, but Paul brought up possible options for a backup in addition to Colt McCoy, obviously, and some of the higher-end backups that could become available that have been spot starters in the past. Obviously, you have Andy Dalton, who's going to be a free agent from Dallas. He signed only a one-year deal there. Tyrod Taylor is a free agent. He's probably not going to want to return there as a backup to Justin Herbert, you wouldn't think. Mitch Trubisky could hit free agency with the Bears. And Jacoby Brissett, another guy who has been a starter before from the Colts. So if you want to look at the high-end backups, those are, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, too, is in the mix there as well. Those would be the guys, if you're looking for a high-end backup, that are going to be on the free agent market. But to Paul's point, they're going to cost a little bit extra money.
Well, and that's what it comes down to. And the cap will probably go down. It may not go down as low as the initial reports were, but the Giants have other priorities, specifically on the defensive line and elsewhere in terms of re-signing players, that they're probably not going to have the luxury of spending a lot of money for a backup quarterback. McCoy also has familiarity with the offense, which is another thing that I would add that I think makes him attractive to come back. I happen to like Tyrod Taylor. He was a guy that I circled when I was looking over the free agent market. I do think, though, Taylor is probably going to, want to pursue a starting job. Number two, I think he's going to cost some money. But the guys like Tyrod Taylor, who you feel can come in, God forbid your starter gets hurt, makes a lot of sense because he's somebody that has starting experience and, he can go out and win a football game. But I think when you tackle the money, you tackle the experience, you tackle the familiarity with the offense, a guy like Colt McCoy coming back makes a lot of sense. I think if Jason Garrett has his choice, He probably would want a veteran quarterback backing up Daniel Jones, somebody that's been in the league, somebody that could handle the backup position. Why? Because Jason Garrett was a backup himself. So I think if anybody understands what you want out of that position, it's the Giants' current offensive coordinator. I also think Joe Judge wants somebody that they know, based on their experience with Daniel Jones this past season, that could come in. And I don't think it's necessarily being a game manager. I think you can make the argument every quarterback's a game manager. The whole point is you're supposed to manage the game, not make mistakes, put your team in a position to win. It's a matter of you think a guy that could come in and run your offense and not hurt you, and also perhaps have some previous starting experience. That's what I would want out of a backup quarterback. For example, you brought up Andy Dalton. Dalton, to me, was a great move by the Cowboys. And, unfortunately, it turned out to be even more valuable because Dak went down. I do think Dalton's going to get a starting job. I think New England is a team that makes a lot of sense. So I don't think Andy's going to be settling for a backup job. But those backup quarterbacks have proven over the course of recent history, that's the difference between making and missing out on the playoffs, especially if you need to rely on them for a start or two.
You know, Lance, there's one other guy that we really kind of should throw into that journeyman backup kind of bin, and that would be Brian Hoyer. Because remember now, Hoyer, same situation as McCoy. He has started some games in this league, but he's been mostly a backup during his career. He probably would take a one-year minimum. And he and Joe Judge were both with the Patriots in 2018. So there is a previous connection there if you're looking for that pipeline to kind of trace back to Judge's past. Hoyer, to me, would be a kind of a lateral move from McCoy.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely, Paul, put those guys in pretty much the same category. So what are your thoughts if, again, we don't know how the Giants really view this because last year was unique with the pandemic, about having a third quarterback in that room that's young and a developmental guy? Alex Tanney recently announced his retirement. He's already hooked up, I believe, an offensive assistant with the Eagles. I think that took about 6 hours to get that deal done.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you know Nick Sirianni from your playing days. So.
Exactly. So that happened very, very quickly. So what are your guys' thoughts on the Giants using one of their draft picks this year on a quarterback? And obviously I'm not talking about the first or second round. We're not talking about Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Mac Jones. We'll talk about Trevor Lawrence's pro day in just a little bit. But, you know, in a mid-round pick or a fourth-round pick, would you consider a Kyle Trask, a Kellen Mond, you know, somebody like that? I don't know if Trask is going to necessarily last that long, where it's a guy that has relative upside, where maybe they can become an eventual high-end backup or maybe even a potential starter? Or do you feel more comfortable picking a real developmental guy late like Jamie Newman out of Georgia / Wake, something like that?
You want to go first, Paul?
Well, I was going to defer to you first, but I had a couple of thoughts. Go ahead.
Sure.
Go
Go ahead, Paul. That's
well,
fine.
I mean,
you guys have never fought about who, like, trying to talk second, by the way. This is like the first ever in Big Blue Kickoff Live history. Just saying.
Well, John, here's the thing for me. I would not mind bringing in a third guy. In all honesty, I don't know if he would wind up deserving a spot on the 53 or if he'd wind up being a practice squad guy for me. And part of the reason is we also don't know what the practice squad rules are going to be this year.
Well, if you're not sure what they're going to be, then you're not talking about a third, fourth, or fifth round.
Correct.
Guy.
Correct.
Yeah, because you can't afford to lose that player.
Correct. I'm thinking, to be honest with you, if I'm going to go late third day and I just want to take a flyer on a dark horse guy who might at some point in time be a decent backup, what about Ellinger out of Texas or Ian Book out of Notre Dame?
Good choices. I think they're both in that Colt McCoy mold, for lack of a better description. I think they're very similar physically to him, too.
Well, Ellinger's also from Texas, where Colt McCoy came from, so that's another similarity.
That is true. So those, for me, if I decided that I was going to go for a flyer for a guy like that, I'd wait till the 6th or 7th round. I think those guys will be there. And that would be my, quote, developmental backup if I wanted to go that route.
Before you select a player like that, regardless of where you want to take them, because I would think, listen, you bring in a young developmental quarterback, unless you're taking a guy in the 6th or the 7th round, I want to make sure that I have a roster spot for him. So I would hope that the NFL And it may not, because the NFL may just see how the summer plays out, what the practice squad is going to look like. Because if I know that I have a similar practice squad in terms of volume, I'm not even thinking twice about drafting a quarterback. I know there's a good chance that I'll have the room to retain the services of a player. If I don't, I have to weigh whether or not then I'm maximizing the pick. I think the Giants will be fine with 2 quarterbacks on the 53 roster. They did that for the bulk of this season. I don't think that there's any regrets, and I don't think there's any concerns. If they re-sign Colt McCoy, they bring in a veteran, have him serve as the security blanket for Daniel Jones, and then, God forbid, you have to bring in somebody mid-season. You could do that. You have the flexibility. Another guy, by the way, that I think is important to bring up, Joe Webb was added to the Giants roster late last season. He's a versatile player. That may be somebody else they entertain bringing back, too. I wouldn't rule him out, and maybe he becomes that third option because he could play the quarterback position, but he could also contribute to other facets of the team. It may make sense to have that guy be your third quarterback as opposed to rolling the dice with a young guy and you don't know if you really have the roster spot for him. But if they want a player that's in this draft class that they think has potential, that they think could develop into a backup or maybe down the road compete for a starting job, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Remember, I always say this. You can never have enough at every position in the NFL, even the quarterback position, because you can't control the injury bug. But I think you really want to know what the practice squad is going to look like before you make a commitment like that.
Interesting in that the Giants did sign Webb to a future reserves contract right after the season. So
now I would not classify him as a developmental quarterback.
No.
He would be like
but I
your
wouldn't also
emergency
classify
guy.
him as a quarterback alone, though.
No, I would call him an emergency quarterback. That's what I would call him.
Yeah, but I mean the fact that he was out of football and then the Giants kind of rescued him, from that bin during the season, and now they gave him a futures deal. That must mean they really want him to come to training camp to see if there's a spot, right?
Sure.
I mean, not necessarily as a quarterback. I agree with John. He's not a developmental quarterback, but as a guy who's a Swiss Army knife, they must feel that there's a potential that he could be of use. Otherwise, why would you sign him to that deal?
All right, we had Trevor Lawrence's pro day today, guys. Let's get into that for just a second. But first, limited Giant season tickets are on sale now for the 2021 season. In addition to ticket savings, membership benefits include access to exclusive events, experiences, pre-sales, and more. You can now lock in your seat starting at just $100. Call 888-NYG-1925 or visit Giants.com/tickets for more information. Look, he threw the ball, I think, 30 or 31 times during that. His last few, he basically just fired it 60 to 65 yards down the field on the money. It reminds me of when Josh Allen had his pro day, and Jordan Palmer was also Josh Allen's quarterback trainer the same way he is for Lawrence. He's like, all right, I'm going to give you the chance to just show off the goods here and just chuck it as far as you can. It wasn't quite Josh Allen level distance, but it was good enough. And look, he was tall, he was fluid, and we are going to get into free agent quarterbacks in a second, by the way. I just thought he checked every box you want. His measurements were good, just about 6'5.5", only 213 pounds, which is a little bit light, but I know some people think he's going to have that left non-throwing shoulder surgery that he hasn't really been able to lift with that injury, so that probably explains why he's a little bit light. But look, as much as you can tell from these workouts, they're not going to move the needle, but he checked every single box you would want. And I think the fact that Urban Meyer was standing next to Dabo Swinney about 5 feet away from Trevor Lawrence as he made all these throws, I think we know what's going to happen here, guys. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any doubt about that. For me, the intrigue had nothing to do with Trevor Lawrence. It had to do with the guy he was throwing to, Cornell Powell. Who had a terrific season for Clemson. It was a breakout redshirt senior year, and he also went to the Senior Bowl, had a nice back shoulder throw catch on the sideline where he was able to stay in bounds.
He had a couple drops, though.
He did. I mean, this is a guy who underachieved until his final season with the Tigers.
Well, he never really had the chance to play.
He was buried.
And then Justin Ross got hurt this year, and they had, I think, a second wide receiver get hurt too. And then all of a sudden, he finally got a shot.
Buried on the depth chart, but in his redshirt season, he came back and had terrific production. A guy who, I want to say he caught a half a dozen touchdown passes. I think when I checked at his stats,
had
something
like
16 yards a catch, right? And 16 yards a catch. He has the ability to make catches, good strong hands, has yak yardage ability. We've all seen Clemson a number of times on television. This is not a guy I need to study now because I've already seen Clemson a bunch of times on TV. He's a good player. I think he's probably a fourth-round value for somebody who, wants to enhance their depth at wide receiver. And according to Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated, the Giants did have 2 representatives amongst all of the NFL scouts who were watching the Clemson Pro Day. I can't imagine the Giants were doing a ton of research on Lawrence. I would think they were probably looking very carefully at Powell.
Yeah, Powell, I think, I'd turn them a mid-round pick. So you're looking maybe end of day 3, round 4-ish, somewhere around 5 maybe.
Well, that
somewhere
would be the
in
beginning
that
of
area.
day 3, John.
Right, exactly.
Round 4 is the beginning of day 3. And I see him as a fourth-round guy and somebody who has a make-it grade on a 53-man roster.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant end of day 2. End of round 3, which would be end of day 2.
You think he can get that high? Maybe he can.
I mean, look.
Maybe he can.
If you're calling him a fourth-round pick, if he gets picked with like the last pick in the 3rd round, that's not really a surprise, right?
No, he's in the neighborhood there. And I do think he's got to make it great on him.
Sure
I think he's going to stick in the league.
Yeah, I think he's going to be one of those kind of like unspectacular possession receivers that you kind of know what you're getting out of him. And he's not like some guy that's going to blow you away when he does his testing, but it looks like he could be a pretty solid player.
Well, listen, if that's what he could develop into, you need somebody to move the chains consistently.
Yeah.
Guys have carved out some decent careers with that label, so I don't see why he can't assume something like that. As far as the Giants' presence there, I mean, they could have very well been doing some homework on Trevor Lawrence, too. You never know how the draft plays out. I'm not saying he's going to fall, but I think you should be prepared.
He'll be there at 11, Lance.
No, I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is you don't know how trades play out. You don't know, maybe you play Trevor Lawrence down the road, something you picked up. Who knows?
Well, if I remember right, didn't Bill Belichick used to say that's why he went to all these pro days to get to know these kids just in case you face them later, and maybe he's a free agent one day. Who the heck knows?
All of that information could be put in a file, and you never know when it could be helpful down the road.
You have to do your due diligence, regardless. 100%.
That's true.
All right, so let's have a little fun here before we get to the calls. We already have somebody on hold at 973-667-1960. By the way, there are some of you folks out there that like calling at 11:45, thinking I'm going to put you on hold that early. I'm not. So I basically sit here working for 15 minutes with my phone ringing, which drives me absolutely nuts.
All right, Charlie, so back off.
I am not going to pick up the phone before like 11:58. I'm just warning all of you, okay? So don't call like at 11:45 thinking I'm going to put you on hold for 20 minutes because I'm not. Anyway, I had to get that out there. So, we talked about the draft guys, and it's a big free agent crop at quarterback too. These are the teams that I have listed here, and you can stop me if you think I'm off base on any of these or I'm missing anybody. I'm kind of going from NFC East through the AFC. These are the teams that I think could have some movement or at least decisions to make at quarterback this year, and will have an impact on the market, and then we'll kind of go from there and have some fun, okay? So you have Dallas, who obviously Dak Prescott is scheduled to become a free agent. They can franchise him a second time, which I think we all think they're going to do. Philly, they could trade Carson Wentz. Washington, they don't really have that young starter they want to move forward with. Maybe Alex Smith returns, but I think they're in the market for a quarterback. Does Detroit want to add somebody with Jared Goff? What is Chicago going to do? You got to imagine they're looking for an upgrade. Does Atlanta try to find the guy after Matt Ryan? I don't think that move gets made this year, but they pick in the top 10. Do they want to try to get that next guy in the building? The Saints, do we know if Drew Brees is coming back? Indications are he's going to retire. We don't know. Jameis Winston, he's a free agent. The Carolina Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater under contract. Do they want the next guy? The Jets, Darnold, they pick second. Deshaun Watson, who knows? Miami, is Tua. Did he show them enough in that first year, or would they be in the market for a guy like Watson? The Steelers, Roethlisberger's back, but would they be looking for that next guy down the road? Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence, check. Houston, Deshaun Watson, decision to make. They got to figure it out. Oakland, reports are that they're getting – oh, you're right. I have Oakland right now. Las Vegas. Thank you, Lance. Reports are they've gotten offers for Derek Carr and turned them down. We obviously – and I believe David Carr is the one that reported that, so he would know. We don't know what they plan to do there. Also, rumors that they've taken calls on Marcus Mariota, who had a very nice single start for them this year. And then the Denver Broncos, who have Drew Lock as their starter, but who knows if they might want to make a change here or there. And some of those teams picking the top 10 guys. We have 5 quarterbacks that could go in the first round. Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones. And then you have all the veterans we talked about, in addition to the ones that we mentioned. Cam Newton, a free agent, and Dak Prescott, as I mentioned, also potentially hitting free agency, though he is expected to be franchised. Any teams I missed there that you think could be possibly in the market for a quarterback?
Colts?
Well, I'd throw
Colts,
out a few.
thank you. That's a good one, Paul.
Yeah,
How
the
about
Colts.
Niners?
That's a good one, too. I'll
The Patriots.
add those to my list. Patriots.
And I'd even throw out, I didn't hear the Chicago Bears on that list.
No, the Bears I mentioned. The
Oh,
Bears
you did
I
mention?
got.
Okay. Did not hear that. Okay.
The other three I missed, though. So that is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That's 18 teams that I have listed right there that could change quarterbacks or at least add somebody at the quarterback position. So how do you think, guys, and I think will be interesting, who are some of the key teams you're keeping an eye on here, especially when it comes to teams that are picking in the top 10 that could impact maybe with the trade, what the Giants do at 11, or could make a move in free agency or a trade or both, that you really think are going to control this quarterback market, besides the Texans, who are obvious, and determine how this whole thing this offseason is going to play out? Lance, how about you first?
Well, New England, to me, is an intriguing team. I know they're not necessarily picking ahead of the Giants, but I could see them doing a double move where they bring in a veteran, but they also maybe look to find the future quarterback in the draft.
And they can always
maybe
trade
this
up,
is
too.
The year
Who knows?
they become a little bit aggressive. I know normally they don't do that in the draft. They don't move up. Usually they move back. But I don't know. Maybe this is a turning point year. Maybe they realize the veteran experiment didn't work last year. They don't love the young guys they have on the roster. They want to do something different. Another thing is perhaps New England, with a lot of cap space, makes a big splash in free agency, too. They've got a lot more wiggle room than they did at this time last year. So I think the Patriots are an intriguing team because there's a lot of mystery surrounding them just by default. But this could be a crossroads for the New England Patriots. I think the Colts, too, because the Colts have proven they're not going to shy away from delving into the free agent market. They did that with Phillip Rivers. I thought Matt Stafford would have been a really good fit for them, but Carson Wentz is a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they trade for him. Remember, Wentz was with Frank Reich early in his career. He did very well in 16 and 17. That reunion, I think, would make a lot of sense. Or Indianapolis, once again, could dig into free agency. So, those are two teams I think that come to mind immediately. Now, those teams are in the AFC, so they're not necessarily going to revamp the NFC structure. If you were to ask me about an NFC team that I think perhaps could impact things for the Giants, I think the Giants really need to keep close tabs on everybody in the division. Let's face it, because there's a chance that all three of those teams could have a new quarterback. I do think the Cowboys would make a lot of sense bringing back Dak Prescott, but hey, whenever you're dealing with the franchise tag for the second straight year, who knows? And Philadelphia and Washington could either bring back guys that are currently on the team, or they can also make some moves. So right now, if I'm the Giants, I'd be keeping close tabs on my division rivals more so than anybody else, because that's going to directly impact you, considering you're going to play them twice next year.
Paul, how about you?
Well, it's interesting. I had two answers for you, and Lance just took one of them, and that is I need to figure out what's going on with those other three teams in my division. I mean, there's no question. That's my priority right now in terms of where I'm watching the quarterback carousel land. I've got to be watching the other three teams in my division because we all know the best way to make the playoffs is to win your own division. And the Giants proved by sweeping the entire division at home this year and splitting with two of the teams that there is as good a chance as anybody, have as good a chance to win this division. And they've got to feel that going in, especially if there's an unsettled quarterback situation. So my first answer is I want to look at the three quarterback spots in the NFC East aside from the Giants. My second answer is how many quarterbacks are going in the top 10 with the Giants picking at 11? Most people seem to believe for sure there's going to be 3. There are some projections out there that say there could be 4. Mm-hmm. So now I say to myself, okay, well, where are we looking here in terms of the top 10 who could take the QBs? And it just seems to me, besides the Lawrence pick of Jacksonville, I really don't know what the Jets are doing it to, and I think they really control the draft.
I'm with you, Paul. That was going to be my answer. I think the Jets control this whole deal from the from a potential Deshaun Watson trade to a potential trade down, to potentially taking a quarterback. What they do is going to kind of create a
domino effect,
an avalanche that's going to affect the rest of the league. Absolutely. I'm
without a doubt, John. I mean, because, look, if you're any of these other teams that we talked about who have a questionable quarterback spot, whether it's Philly at 6 because we don't know what they're doing with Wentz, or Carolina at 8 with Bridgewater, kind of like, well, whatever, and Denver with what's his face?
Drew Lock.
Drew Lock. I mean, those teams, of those 3, I would say right now it's a pretty damn good bet. At least 2 of those 3 teams are going to take quarterbacks, right?
Right.
I mean, can we probably say that? Probably at least 2, maybe 3. So the question becomes, what's happening with the Jets at 2? To me, that's the linchpin that either makes the avalanche or the dominoes fall and create what's going to be 4 quarterbacks in the top 10, or maybe only 3 quarterbacks in the top 10. Because if they don't take one and they keep the pick, well, now, you know what? You're looking at probably 2 more after Lawrence. Still a chance for 3 more, but likely at least 2.
Yeah, see, if they don't pick a quarterback there, Paul, I think it's the way Joe Douglas has operated trying to acquire picks. I think it's extremely unlikely the Jets stay there at 2 if they don't pick a quarterback.
Okay.
And I think that's what's interesting to me. If the Jets and Dolphins and Falcons at 2, 3, and 4, teams that could be interested in a quarterback but not necessarily interested in a quarterback, if those teams decide they're not in the quarterback market, my guess, and again, we're way too early in the process to know this, is that there's going to be a lot of disagreement after Trevor Lawrence, who the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th best quarterbacks are in this class. People are going to fall in love with Justin Fields' tools, which are probably slightly better than Zach Wilson's, but Zach Wilson's a better quarterback. Maybe someone's going to look at Trey Lance and say, oh my goodness gracious, this guy has, Pat Mahomes-like tools, and we think we can turn him into a star. I think depending on where teams value those players, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty what teams like these players. So I think there's going to be a lot of motivation where if one team maybe loves one of those 3 but doesn't love the other 2, where you're like, all right, I got to move up here. So I think there could be a lot of trade action in that 2 through 4 or even 5 with the Bengals at 5, though I think they might like an offensive tackle at 5 if they can get him. There could be a lot of trade action there from 2, 3, and 4, and it could be with a team already in the top 10, Paul, to your point, like the Panthers or the Broncos. But what if it's what if it's with a team like the Niners at 12? What if it's with a team like New England at 15? What if it's like a team like Washington at 19 or Chicago at 20 or Indianapolis at 21? And that could bring those teams above the Giants to select a quarterback, which obviously pushes better players down to the Giants at 11. So that, I think, is a real interesting thing to keep an eye on, too. Those teams at 2, 3, 4 in this class, in this draft, how willing are they going to be able to move down where other teams can go up and pick that quarterback?
Well, what about Cincinnati?
I think
they could move down.
Given Bobby Hart's one of their starting offensive tackles, Paul,
yeah.
My guess is that they're going to want to put somebody next to to protect Joe Burrow with Jonah Williams so Burrow doesn't blow up his knee again in his 2nd year in the league.
Well, what if it's only 2 or 3 spots? What if they move
could
down
still
to
very well
what if they trade
with an offensive lineman there?
Yeah, they could trade with Carolina or Denver.
That's I think 8 or 9 is a little bit risky, but they could. You're right. But again, that doesn't necessarily see. That's my point, though. I don't think Cincinnati's moving out of the top 10. So if Cincinnati,
I think you're probably right.
Cincinnati swaps with a team at 8 or 9, it really doesn't impact the Giants, right? Because they're ahead of the Giants anyway.
Correct.
So that's kind of why I think Cincinnati is going to pick a receiver or an offensive tackle, just because I think that's where the value is in this draft, right at the top. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I look at that.
John,
go ahead. I'm sorry, Paul.
In most years, I do think that quarterbacks are overdrafted, and I know
of course
that
they are. They always are.
And here's the thing. Because there are so many teams right now on that quarterback carousel, it's going to push the overdrafting tendency even higher.
Sure.
Well, it depends on what happens at free agency.
And by the way, not to get ahead of ourselves, but just based on a couple of things that I've heard from people that do scouting for a living, next year's quarterback class,
not great.
Not maybe one top 10 level guy at this point. A kid out of Liberty, believe it or not. So not apparently supposed to be all that great.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and not only that, you have to remember something else, Lance. It's not just about the free agency issue. It's also about cap money.
Yeah, cheap quarterbacks, right?
Oh,
yeah.
My goodness. How many teams are now going to put a bigger emphasis
Great point, Paul.
on having a quarterback who's on a cheap deal?
Great point.
Well, I think that's the ultimate goal for any team, regardless of what the cap is, because quarterback's going to take up the biggest piece of the cap. But once again, we are talking about two teams with quarterbacks that had nice contracts this season that did make the Super Bowl. In Patrick Mahomes, he already has a new deal, and Tom Brady, who is getting paid good money from Tampa Bay. So, once again, there's many ways to put your roster together. I think talent trumps what the salary cap presents from a struggle standpoint. I think also you could say with not a lot of college film this year, would teams maybe shy away from some of these young quarterbacks because the jury is still out and they're not sure about some of these guys other than Trevor Lawrence, who, is a multi-year starter, and you feel good about what transpired before the 2020 season.
All you need is one, Medow.
No, all you need is one. I get that. But maybe they don't want to move up as high as they normally would.
Possible.
And they'd rather take their chances later on in the draft. There's a lot of scenarios that could play out. I will tell you this. While we always speculate about there's going to be a million trades, there were no top 10 trades last year. There was one 2019.
Though, by the way, Paul and I were trying to tell people that, for the most part, during the draft process last year, that we didn't think the teams like Miami and the LA Chargers were going to have to move because we thought their guys would be there when
Correct.
they picked.
We did feel that.
Well, but there was just one in 2019, and that wasn't even for a quarterback. That was the Steelers moving up to get Devin Bush.
True.
So the last 2 years, we've had one trade in the top 10.
But if you go back,
I don't think history is relevant here because
it may not. I'm just saying
this is
that
a unique circumstance.
But once again, there were a lot of quarterbacks, what I'm saying, in a few of these drafts that we could talk about, and sometimes teams may want to get somebody that doesn't play the quarterback position, and we're thinking quarterback. For example, the Lions, I think a lot of people are thinking Detroit's going to take quarterback. Maybe Brad Holmes, who is the former Rams scouting guy, thinks Jared Goff is young, could be a good fit, and maybe they don't feel like they want to utilize a pick on a quarterback.
I don't think
that's
there's
crazy.
any way Detroit is taking a quarterback. They just made that deal. Goff is going to be their guy. They're going to be married to him, whether or not you
Goff
like
is
it.
not on a long-term deal, is what I'm saying. So maybe they feel, hey, Goff's the bridge for the next 2 years, and then we make way for the young guy. I could see that too.
To me, Detroit will only pick a quarterback there if they fall in love with the guy. They're not going to move up for one. Only if somebody falls in their lap that they love will they pick one. That's how I kind of view that one.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is it could go either way, though, with respect to the Lions.
Absolutely.
They're very much a wild card.
John, I'll say this, and I absolutely agree with that theory. In most cases, you got to fall in love with the guy to take him if you're going to be that high in this draft or in any draft. But here's the thing. Outside of Lawrence, do you honestly believe that anybody out there is worthy of 150% conviction that, oh, my God, I absolutely love this guy?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't Lawrence the only guy?
Teams will fall in love with these guys, Paul. You know that.
They will have preferences.
They will convince themselves that they love these guys.
That's the thing, though. They'll have to convince themselves because
but that happens every year. That happens every. Paul,
it does.
There just aren't that many can't miss perfect quarterback prospects.
I know. Well, I will quote Mike Tannenbaum, who just was on ESPN and said after Lawrence, this next group of 4 quarterbacks is the riskiest group of QBs he's ever seen this high in a draft. And I happen to agree with him.
That's interesting.
I really do. I totally agree with him. And he said teams are all going to fall all over themselves and force their way up to try to pick these guys. And every single one of them has significant questions.